guys, it's Eric, owner of Farpoint Farms here in the mountains of North Carolina, and tonight it is finally time to handle and take care of part 4 of why I miss Radio Shack and why you should too. It's time to talk about TRC, CB radios, ham radios, shortwave radios, man, Radio Shack radios. I mean, it is called Radio Shack, right? Now, I am not a historian, so I will probably leave out a lot of the cool moments in Radio Shack history when it comes to radios. But what I can tell you is that at some point in the very early 80s, when I became aware of CB radios, I immediately fell in love with the idea of being able to talk to people all over the place via the radio waves. I thought it was just so cool. Apparently, many other people did as well, because Radio Shack was very well known and did extraordinarily well with the CB radio craze of both the 70s and 80s and 90s. In fact, walking into a Radio Shack here in 2019 will still lead you right to an aisle with some CB radios. And I love that about them, that they didn't give up on it. It wasn't a fad to them. They got in on it and they stayed in on it. And they made some incredible radios over the years. I'm going to show some pictures just randomly. I might pick out a few as I go through this conversation here. But, you know, they're starting off the TRC line, and back in the very early days, you were looking at 3-channel radios or 6-channel radios, but very quickly they moved up to the 23-channel radios that were popular in the mid to late 70s, and they had quite a few, and I personally own many of them. I've had some of these. Well, I'm going to point out this one here, the TRC that looks like the phone here, and the one I have pictured is probably a 40-channel model, but the one I personally owned was a 23-channel. It had a phone receiver just like your old dial-up phones would have. But it was a great little radio, and I really enjoyed that. And I don't even know what I ended up doing with that. I think it finally just died on me, so I got rid of it. But they were big, they were popular for a couple years, and they also made great base stations. It's just kind of goofy, something different. And of course, they moved on to the 40-channel rigs, and they did really well with that. A lot of mobile radios. I know I dreamed. I think it was the TRC 274 or 474. It's a beautiful radio that used to go on sale several times a year. Actually, when it came time for me to purchase one of them, I ended up getting a handheld, the TRC 216 instead. But it's a radio that I have since owned, and I always found it to be a good-looking radio and a good performing radio. But they made so many. I mean, it's so hard to keep track of them all. I know the TRC 415, was one that one of my close friends bought for his brand new, 1991 Dodge truck when he got it, and he got the dual antennas to go with it. And of course, most, if not all, of these radios were actually rebranded or redesigned radios. A lot of them from Maxton, some from Uniden and Cobra. But Radio Shack, they would redesign them or add their own flair to them and sell them as their own, and they really outsold many of the name brand radios of their time. I imagine if you were going to look at how many Cobra radios or Uniden radios were sold in any given year, say through the late 70s, early 80s, and then you put them up against any particular model of Realistic, I think the Realistics would probably have them beat. And a quick look at the used market will usually tell you that as well. You just see so many of these things for sale. And of course, Radio Shack got in the base station market. I had a Shakespeare Big Stick, which was their Archer, just the Archer base station antenna. That's what they had, was rebranded Shakespeare. But they had antennas, and of course they had base stations. I've owned several Radio Shack base stations. Never had a base station from Radio Shack that was a sideband, but they certainly did make them for a time. And they were great. I mean, they just had a lot of that stuff. They also had the one-handers, which I've done some videos on over the years. And emergency CB radios, which are still, I think, are something that they're kind of like should be in people's trunks. Even if you're not going to set up an antenna and have, drill some holes, put it in your dash, you should at least have one of these little boxes and throw it in your trunk. It doesn't cost much. It's not a bad idea to have it. And here's a picture of one. I had one growing up. I actually used it as a base station for some years. And of course, if we're going to talk about Radio Shack radios, let's just not just talk about CBs, because they also made some really nice shortwave radios. I've certainly done a few. I've got the DX100, but they had the 300 and the 200. They also had the Patrolman series, which was more like a boombox looking radio, but had some great features in it. And I was surprised while I was doing research for this that the realistic DX394, I had never seen that radio before, but man, it kind of looks cool. It does CW, shortwave. I mean, Yeah, USB, LSB. I mean, it's a really nice digital radio. Looks more like a scanner to me. And maybe that's why I've never noticed what they actually were. But now I'm on the hunt because I definitely want to get one. They're just that cool looking. They also had the DX150, which looked like a console, like a home stereo system kind of rig, but beautiful shortwave radios. And they also got into ham radio. And this is something I do kind of wonder about with Radio Shack. They never really were big into ham radio, and I think there was the opportunity there, but apparently they did the math and decided that it wasn't good enough for them to get into the market. But they did the HTX series. I had the 252 personally, which was a 2-meter setup, but they also had the HTX 100, which was a 10-meter setup. They had a couple of entries into the ham market, but never dove deep. Never had a full HF rig. Never really got into it deep. They were more into scanners and shortwave receivers and certainly, of course, CB radios. So, man, I could just sit here all night and just show pictures of these beautiful, realistic TRC model radios. Interestingly enough, the last few years that it was on the market, or still, Radio Shack was still pumping strong, they changed a lot of these radios. No longer said realistic. They were Radio Shack radios. My TRC 503, which was a great radio, that I've done a review on here at some point, real compact radio. That was a Radio Shack branded radio. It wasn't even a realistic, which I thought was kind of interesting. I've also owned a TRC 451 sideband model. That was a good radio. So there's just a lot of them out there, and of course flyers and stuff. Anyway, that's it. This is part 4 of this fine series. The last part 5, just talks about the ultimate demise. And again, I'm no historian, but I'll talk about my personal experiences as Radio Shack faded into oblivion. And I say that saying and knowing full well that there is an open Radio Shack within 2 hours of my house in either direction. And certainly last summer I found a wonderful Radio Shack, Vern's Radio Shack in Idaho. That was awesome, totally awesome. And I did a video on that, so you feel free to check that one out and certainly give them business if you're in the area. That's it for today, my friends. I will see you next time. Take care.
Something that needs a little